This is a review of the Rosewill Quark series of power supplies. They're platinum quality power supplies. Here we have the Quark 750 and over here we have the Quark 1200. Inside the box you'll find the 1200 watt power supply. You'll find an AC power cord. You'll find a motherboard main connector, which on the motherboard end is a 20 or 24 pin connection depending what type of motherboard and CPU you're using. Next to that you have 4 PCI cables with 8 connectors of 6 plus 2. Here we have 2 EPS cables with 2 4x4 connectors on each end, so you have 4 of those connectors. Here you have 2 Molex cables that allow you to connect to accessory Molex connections and also to floppy disk drives, for example. And then here you have 3 SATA cables, and each cable has a whopping 5 connectors on each cable, which allows you to connect 15 SATA drives and power them up. In addition, you have 3 cable ties and 4 mounting screws for the power supply, and you also have an instruction manual. In addition, you have a bag with a Velcro seal. Whatever cables you don't use, stick in there and save them, because as you expand your computer in the future, you may have to go back and use some of those cables. Inside of the Quark 750, you're going to find the power supply itself, an instruction manual, and a bag that contains all the cables. Again, save the bag. You will need it to pull cables out in the future. You have an AC power cord. You have a main motherboard connection, and it also splits into a 20 plus 4. You have 2 PCIe cables with 4 connections on them of 6 plus 2 pins. And then next to that, you have 2 EPS cables with 2 connectors on each end of 4 plus 4. Here you have 2 Molex accessory cables that you can plug in. I use these to plug in fans, for example. And you also have a connector for a floppy drive. And then here you have 2 SATA power cables. Each cable has 4 SATA power connections on it. In addition, you have 4 mounting screws and you have 3 cable ties. These are what you call full modular power supplies, which means the power supply itself has no cables coming out of it. You have to add the cables you want. I've built a lot of computers. I only use modular power supplies because it allows me to use only the cables I want to use in the case, minimize the clutter, and improve the airflow and cooling efficiency of the fans in the case. Both of these power supplies are 80 plus platinum certified. What that really means is that they have a 92% efficiency. Part of that's achieved by the fact that they have automatic power factor correction. Power factor correction means that inside of this is a lot of inductive coils, transformers, and that shifts the current out of phase with the voltage. In addition, what they do to correct for that is they insert high-quality Japanese capacitors to help regulate the voltage and phase shift the current back in line with the voltage. If they didn't do that, this power supply would draw excessive amounts of current and waste it in heat. This system here has 5 different voltage rails. It has a 3.3 volt at 25 amps, a plus 5 volt at 22 amps, a plus 12 volt at 100 amps. It has a minus 12 volt at 0.3 of an amp and a plus 5 volt SB at 2.5 amps. To keep this puppy cool, there's a 135 millimeter fan here that has an automatic speed control. The hotter it gets, the faster it runs, so that keeps it quiet under normal operating conditions. Here on the back side, you can see the power off-on switch where the power plug goes. One of the things you got to be careful of is when you use a large power supply, you have to make sure that you have enough room in the case to fit it in there. One of the unique things that you'll see here is you'll see 6 LEDs. They turn green when everything's working properly. And here you have the 5 volt SB, the 12 volt bus, the 5 volt bus, the 3.3 volt bus, the minus 12 volt bus, and the PG or Power Good LED. Across here you'll see the plug-in ports here. These 5 ports here are for all your SATA cables. This is your main motherboard power supply here. This is a 24 pin connector. Down here you'll have 4 different PCIe buses that you can plug into and power your GPU cards, for example. And then here you'll have 2 8-port pin connections that you can use to put additional power to the CPU. The first thing I do when I get a power supply, I take it out of the box, I plug it into a tester, and verify that every one of the buses are working. Who wants to put a power supply in a computer only to find out that the power supply is defective and they just destroyed their CPU and other items in the computer? Here I've plugged in the main motherboard power supply, the SATA ports, the PCI bus, and I've also plugged in the CPU auxiliary voltage input. With this now I can test the unit and make sure it's working. I built a lot of computers, so I bought this little power supply tester. This allows me to check a power supply while it's still inside the computer case. I can pull the wires out and plug them in, or I can test a new power supply like I'm doing today and test this without even putting it in. So once I get it all wired up, I'm going to press this button, and what it's going to do, it pops up and tells me the voltages. For example, the 5-volt bus is operating at 5 volts. The plus 12 is 12.1. The plus 3.3 volt is 3.2. The minus 12 is 11.9 volts. Plus 12 is 12.1 volts. And then here we have the 5 volt SB is operating at 4.9 volts. And the PG, or power good indicator, took 400 milliseconds to come on, which is a good time rate. This type of test turns on the power supply. You can see the LEDs light up on the power supply. Everything's working. If you look in the top, you can even see the fan running. I have to be honest with you, it doesn't test the loading on the power supply. It only tests the voltages. But once I've got to this point and tested a power supply, I've never had one fail when I put it in a computer. I wanted to talk a bit about using a modular power supply and why I think it's very important to do. To me, when you build a computer, you want to dress the wires in very nicely to improve the airflow through the computer. That's what keeps things cool. That's what keeps your CPU cool. That's what keeps your GPUs cool. It lets the fans do the work and move the air around without it being blocked by a lot of cables and wires always located in the wrong place. The thing I like about modular power supplies, you only use the wires that you want to use. If you're only going to want to have one GPU card, you only plug one of them in and use it. If you go back and expand your computer and add a second card or other peripheral cards, you can plug in more cables and use them to power up your devices. Modular power supplies are easy to use. You plug in the cables and you route them the way you want to route them. Make it a nice clean installation. You can see here I have the cables tied together so that they're nice and dressed so that the airflow can move around. Nothing's in the way of these GPU fans, for example. I've got it all pulled away and tied down. This is why I always focus on using modular power supplies in the designs I build. I like them a lot. I think it's the best way to go. I like the nice way that the case is painted. It makes it look attractive, but let's face it, the important part's on the inside. This is the heart of your computer. It's pumping. It's pumping current every place. You want one that runs cool. You want one that's reliable. This one here, like I said, has a 92% efficiency rating and a 5-year warranty. I've used Rosewill power supplies on some of my biggest computer builds, and I've had no trouble with them at all. I've never had a failure. Here you can see I'm running the same test on the 750 watt Quark unit, and I'm getting 5 volts out of the 5 volt, 12.1 on the 12 volt, 3.3 on the 3.3 volt, 12 volts on the 12 volt, 12.1 on the 12 volt version 2 bus, 5 volts out on the 5 volt SB, and 360 milliseconds response. This type of test, when I do it, I will actually move these cables between every one of these individual ports and check out every port to make sure that they're wired properly and connected properly inside of the power supply. These are excellent power supplies. I'm going to rate them at 5 stars. Like I said, I've used Rosewill before. The computer I'm working on now that has a lot of power in it uses Rosewill. These are excellent power supplies. All the custom computers I build use 750 and higher. Why is that? An overclocked CPU can draw 130 watts, 140 watts. 2 GPUs in Crossfire can draw 150, 160 watts apiece. These are good products. I'm going to rate them at 5 stars. This review is done by JJ CEO. I'd like to tell you I received samples for test and evaluation, and I didn't promise a review, but I promised if I gave one it would be fair and honest.